Isn't this fascinating? So I'm going to turn you into, with my magic wand, I'm going to turn you into a drop of blood. But this drop of blood right now is sad because it has no oxygen in there. It just gave up all the oxygen it had, you know, in the periphery. All the erythrocytes in there gave up all the oxygen they have. So they're walking, dragging themselves, you know, going back to the heart. Because eventually they're going to be pumped toward the lungs where the oxygen is. So we're in the search for oxygen, okay? And the place to go is the lungs. So let's start right here in the right atrium, right? The right atrium receives the blood, the deoxygenated blood from the entire body, and that blood is emptied by the superior and inferior vena cava. They filled the atrium, the right atrium. Now, you know, blood has its weight. Well, blood, any liquid, has its weight. And, you know, these valves are delicate connective tissue in there, and is a little bit in the endocardium, of course, the epithelium. So it's very delicate. The weight of this blood, just by gravity, pushes open these the right atrioventricular valve or tricuspid valve, and the blood starts to flow into the right ventricle. And the right ventricle is like this, filling with blood. Come on, feel. Keeps filling with blood, deoxygenated blood. Now, there is a moment where we cannot fit more blood in there, and the ventricle says, okay, it's time to go. Are you ready? Okay. So it starts contracting, and that contraction increases the pressure in here in the ventricle, in the right ventricle, that forces the right atrioventricular valve to close, and then opens the same contraction when this the same pressure, when this pressure is higher than the pressure here in the pulmonary trunk. It opens the gate or the valve that leads to the pulmonary trunk, which is the pulmonary semilunar valve. And then blood flows right toward the pulmonary trunk. There in the pulmonary trunk, remember that it divides into two pulmonary arteries. I have it here, the left and the right. And then these artery branches like crazy until it forms little tiny capillaries that we'll describe in the next chapter. And the gas exchange occurs right in here and occurs in here in the lungs. And then it gets, blood can pick up the oxygen, gives out the carbon dioxide so it can be expelled. And now the blood is happy again. That drop of blood is happy again because it's full or filled with oxygen. It's oxygenated now. It's bright. It's beautiful. So she says, okay, let me go throughout the body to give more oxygen. That's my job. So she is empty, or we'll explain that part later, next chapter. But then this drop of blood will return to the heart, and all of these little venules will merge to form bigger venules until we form 4 pulmonary veins, right? And we call them vein because they are going to the heart, okay? That's the direction of the flow. And there are 4, 2 in the left side, 2 on the right side. The 4 of them open in the left atrium. So we're already there. Remember, the left side of the heart is the one managing the oxygenated blood. That's its department. So now this drop of blood, guess what? Now it's happy. Super happy. And it's gonna go back, as we said, is empty by the 4 pulmonary veins, into the left atrium, and the left atrium, the same story. The blood in there, the weight of the blood in there opens up the left atrioventricular valve or mitral or bicuspid valve that opens only in one direction, right? Towards the ventricle. Then the ventricle starts to feel, they keep open while they're feeling, when the ventricle is already full with this oxygenated, bright, beautiful blood freshly coming from the lungs. They feel, can you see that they feel when these spaces behind the cusps of the valve, and that pushes up the valves and closes the valve. And at that moment, the pressure keeps going up until it's bigger than the pressure in the aorta, and that causes the opening of the aortic semilunar valve, and the blood is ejected into the aorta and from there to the entire body. So I haven't seen anything new so far, right? Because we just described this in the last video, well, in another video previous to this one. The thing is that this is not completely true. The story is not true. What happens is, because this is the path of one drop of blood throughout all the cavities of the heart. The true story is that the blood is moved in bulk, right? So it's moved all at the same time. So now we have to describe the cardiac cycle. This is what the cardiac cycle is. We have to describe it with another perspective. Okay, we already described it step by step because it's easier to understand, but now we're going to describe it how it really happens, with all the cavities at contracting, both cavity, well, I'll explain in a little bit. You're gonna love it. So both atria, the right and the left, they contract at the same time, and then few milliseconds later, both ventricles, they both contract at the same time to eject the blood toward the blood vessels. And that sequence of atrial contraction and ventricular contraction is what we call a heartbeat. So it's the sequence of contraction of atrial contraction, ventricular contraction, atrial contraction, ventricular contraction. Usually a normal human being, in average, okay, the heartbeat is in between, the heart rate is in between 60 and 100. Under 60 beats per minute, we call that bradycardia. Brady means slow. When you're talking slow, you're like if you think thinking slowly or analyzing slowly is bradycyclic. Taking air, or the lower respiratory rate is bradypnea. So brady means low or lower than the normal range. So that's bradycardia, under 60 beats per minute, which is depending of what is the cause. That can be good or bad. If it's because your heart is in shape and because you exercise a lot of people that works out a lot, athletes, have usually less than 60 beats per minute. Now, above the normal range, above 100 beats per minute, we call that tachycardia. So tachy is above the normal range. Tachylalia, tachypsych, or tachypsych, tachycardia, tachypnea. Okay, so tachy is above the normal range. So let's describe now the real sequence how this happens. Now, number one, and this is taking into consideration both the right and the left, sides of the heart. And this is how it really goes. Number one, both atrium fill at the same time. They're receiving blood. Remember, they're receiving chambers. That's what they do. They're receiving blood at the same time. Deoxygenated, these must be blue. Deoxygenated, and let's keep the coding, okay? But we know that it's not blue. So deoxygenated blood on the right side and bright red oxygenated blood in the left atrium. On the right side is coming from the superior inferior vena cava. In the left atrium is coming from 4 pulmonary veins. All of these blood vessels are veins. The blood vessels opening into the atrium. Now, the blood passes, right, is filling by gravity. These valves at this moment are open and they start to fill the atrium. And remember, and I think I skipped as a phase in here, but they're filling in there, and while the ventricles are filling, the valves are open. At the last moment before these valves are going to close, the atria do contract at the same time, just to give the last little bit or complete the filling of blood of the ventricle. Okay, so it like contracts a little bit, both at the same time again, to finish the filling of the ventricle. So atrial in this moment are relaxed, ventricles at this moment are relaxed, they're filling with blood. At this moment, atria just contracted to complete the filling of the ventricle, and still, see, the valves are closed in this moment, and still all the heart, atrium, and this is milliseconds, atrium and ventricles are contracted, are relaxed. There's no movement of blood at this moment. It's not being filled, it's not going towards the blood vessels. We're keeping the same volume. We call this phase iso, volumetric, the same amount of volume. And these two phases are called diastole. And diastole is when the cardiac muscles around cardiac chamber is relaxed, is being filled, okay, with blood. So this is diastole. When, let me go back. When the blood is completely, okay, when both ventricles, and see, they're both ventricles simultaneously, they're full already, the ventricles start to contract, okay? And remember, the first thing that start to contract are the papillary muscles, so they tense the chorda tendina, avoiding that the flaps of they pull in this direction, like this, so avoiding the flaps of the atrioventricular valve to open in this direction, to open towards the atria and avoiding the backflow of blood. Now, in this moment, it's contracting. Blood is not moving, but the ventricle is actually contracting, concentrically contracting, okay? And which means that even though we are not moving blood, the pressure is being increased in here. We're building up the pressure in here of this blood. And when that pressure is higher than the pressure that we have here in the blood vessels, in the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, it's like when you're trying to open a door and somebody is trying to hold it in the other side, and you're pushing the door like this, and when your force is bigger than the one trying to block the door, you open the door and you go in. Same concept applies in here. When the pressure in the ventricle is higher enough and bigger, of course, higher than the pressure in both the pulmonary trunk and in the aorta, the semilunar valves, which is the exit, remember, of the ventricles, right and left ventricle, open. So the pulmonary semilunar valve in the right ventricle and the aortic semilunar valve in the left ventricle open. And then the blood, the ventricle can eject the blood, and the blood flows through these valves, filling or ejecting the blood. This phase is called systole, which is the contraction of the ventricles, okay? Now, the same factor, or almost the same explanation that caused the atrioventricular valves to close is going to cause, well, but in the other way, is going to cause the closing of the semilunar valves. And it's only by the presence of blood. Blood in here starts as you push. Imagine that you're pushing the blood, you're at the ventricle, you're pushing the blood. At the beginning, the pressure is going to be high, but then the pressure is going to fall, right? And the blood tends to pool right here in, close to the valve. And the accumulation, the pooling of blood in there closes the semilunar valves and avoids the backflow of blood from the arteries, pulmonary trunk and aorta, into the ventricles, the right and the left ventricle. Okay, so that's how the real cardiac cycle goes. Both atria contract at the same time. Okay, they're relaxed, feeling, receiving blood. Then at that moment, atrioventricular valves are open. Then they feel, okay, occurs, or ventricular filling occur. When they're full, atrioventricular valves close. Ventricular contraction occurs next. They open. The force of contraction, or the pressure, opens the semilunar valves. Ventricles eject or pumps the blood through the semilunar valves, and then the semilunar valves close and the ventricle relaxes again. And then the entire cycle repeats. And this repeats 100,000 times a day. In one day, I'm going to repeat this 100,000 times in one day, if you have the heartbeat within normal range. So, of course, you don't want to give more work to the heart and beat more than that. You don't want to increase your blood pressure. You don't want to increase your heart rate, because you will, let's put this into, because you're going to give more work to the heart. The more it beats, the less it's going to last. It's good, because that's why I said like this, during, of course, exercise. That's what you're looking for, to increase your heart rate, but it's in order to condition your heart to adapt to work or to survive even in daily activities with a slower heart rate. And that's conditioning, and that's another different chapter. Okay, let's stop here. See you in the next video. We are going, few things to describe. We're going to understand what is making the noise when you put your ears against somebody's chest, or when you hear with a stethoscope somebody's heart. What is making those sounds? And last, who the blood vessels and the nerves are innervating and irrigating, new term, this organ. See you in the next video.